Good afternoon. Let me introduce you to T.E.B. Clarke, OBE, the man surrounded by initials. Is that how you've been described?
So, I was in Hollywood, yes.
That's
They're
right.
not used to so many initials.
Can you tell me what T.E.B. stands for?
Well, it actually stands for Thomas Ernest Bennett, but everybody's always called me T.E.B. It started as T.E.B. and it was corrupted into T.E.B. and it's been that ever since.
And then explain your OBE.
The OBE was a bit of luck in a way. At that time, 1952, they were knighting all the actors and directors, or giving them CBEs, and then somebody said, what about the writers? And so they said, oh, they better have something. So I was lucky enough to be the one that got the OBE.
Lovely. And then when Hollywood, in fact, described you as a man surrounded by initials, this was because they were giving you an honour too, so to speak, wasn't it?
Yes, I was very lucky there. I got an Oscar for writing The Lavender Hill Mob.
You wrote a lot of Ealing comedies, didn't you?
Yes, I did write I was 16 years with Ealing and wrote quite a number of their comedies.
We are in fact going to have a look at the one that won you the Oscar, which is The Lavender Hill Mob. I remember it very vividly myself. It's the one with Alec Guinness in it, yes? And Stanley...
Alec Guinness and Stanley
Holloway.
Yes. Police car proceeding west along Portobello Road. Intercepted Junction Road. Hello, U6 from M2GW. Stolen police car proceeding west along Portobello Road. Intercepted Junction Road. Over.
I'm proceeding east towards Junction Road. Over.
I'm proceeding west towards Junction Road. Over.
Bring in everything we've got.
I'm now proceeding north towards Junction Road. Over.
I'm proceeding south towards Junction Road.
Over.
I remember that vividly. I thought it was a very funny part. I also thoroughly enjoyed your autobiography, which has just come out, This Is Where I Came In.
Thank you.
And what struck me very forcibly about you as a boy was that you seemed to be a curious combination of a kind of dufferish person, but also a person with a lot of ingenuity. Is that a fair description of yourself, do you think?
Well, I suppose I was certainly a duffer at games. I was a complete duffer because I was a duffer at work. I think perhaps I was unorthodox. I like to think of myself as unorthodox more than a duffer. I mean, I remember at school getting 0 out of 10 for an essay because we were asked to write an essay on the power of the press, and I wrote about the power of the trouser press.
That seems fair enough to me.
Well, it got me in a lot of trouble.
But you see, there again, perhaps that's your enterprise coming in, because there's a lovely story about your enterprise, which I'm going to force you, although you might be too modest, to tell me, please. Do you know the one I mean?
Which one is
Your
this?
enterprise about flags.
Oh, about the flags. That was something I've had to apologise about because I believe I invented Flag Days. In 1914, at the age of 7, which shows how old I am now, I made some Belgian flags, which I sold for a penny each to various friends and gave it to the Belgian Relief Fund. And I was so anxious to see my name in print that I wrote to one of the newspapers about it, and they printed my letter. And somebody at the Red Cross saw the letter and said, this is a rather good idea for Flag Day. And the first Flag Day was for the Red Cross just afterwards, and I believe I was responsible. I'm awfully sorry.
Well, a very nice thing to have done, I think, I must say.
Well, it's cost everybody an awful lot of money ever since.
You were also a juvenile bookie.
Oh, yes, that's another shameful chapter in my life. That was when I was at school at Charterhouse, and I've always been very fond of having a bet on the side, you know, and well, I started having bets with very surreptitiously through a day boy with a bookie in the town, and he was making so much out of us and others who came in with me that we decided to stick the bets, and we were doing very well until it was rumbled because the school library was suddenly, where we used to collect our betting slips, was suddenly being patronised by people who would never have gone near a book in ordinary circumstances, and that made them suspicious, of course, and I jolly nearly got thrown out.
You were obviously terribly keen on school, you know, for its for your ability to be able to get up to pranks and escapades. That's true enough,
I
isn't it?
enjoyed that
about
side
you?
of it, yes, yes.
But I mean, nowadays you'd actually be called an academic dropout, wouldn't you?
I think I would, yes. I should think so.
I mean, why did you resist learning?
I never resisted anything I was interested in, but the trouble was there were so many lessons that I wasn't interested in, and I think I was quite good at the ones I was interested in because, you know, I followed them, but the others, no, I couldn't have cared less about things like Latin because I knew it was never going to be any good to me, or so I thought.
Mm. I mean, do you feel that you were very early on deciding that a lot of education was a waste of time?
I think I did, yes, a certain amount. I mean, chemistry was one. I used to go through agonies at chemistry class. I was a complete duffer at that. And I thought, why should I know about chemistry? I'm not going to be anything to do with chemistry. Whatever I do, it'll be nothing to do with chemistry. Why waste all my hours teaching me things I don't understand? That was one of them.
Well, at a very early age, did you have a sneaking idea of what you might be wanting to be?
I always wanted to write or be a journalist. To write, and even in my nursery days, I used to make a paper called the Nursery News, which nobody ever read except me, and I used to write ridiculous stories, you know, when I was very young. That's the only thing that just came naturally.
One of the things you also were very keen on, which I must say I, you know, joined in with you at being keen myself on at school, was sneaking off to the pics.
Oh yes, yes, I used to do that. It was very difficult at school. We had a dear old fictitious lady that we invented called Mrs. Belcher, and we used to have a leave for Clarke to go to tea with Mrs. Belcher and take Smith and Jones with him, and then we'd all go to the local pictures.
But in your book also, there was one part where you couldn't afford to go to the pictures as often as you wanted to go.
Yes, I was after I'd had to leave school and be crammed because I was so backward. And I went to a crammer's at Tunbridge, and there were 3 cinemas in Tunbridge and 3 in Tunbridge Wells, so that one could theoretically see a different film every day. But that was stopped by pocket money, you see, which didn't run to that. But a wonderful situation arose, which was complete Ealing comedy 25 years before it happened. And that was that a new bus company came along, and whereas the old bus company charged 6pence at Tunbridge Wells, the new one only charged 5pence. So the old one charged 4pence, the new one 3pence. So we went until they were both running free to see who would break the other. And so while they were running free, I was able to see films at both Tunbridge and Tunbridge Wells every day.
I don't know whether I ought to admit this, but what we did about getting into the cinema was that one of us would get in on a ticket, a 9-penny ticket, I think it was at the time, and the rest of us would wait at the side of the cinema, and the person with the ticket would go to the lavatory, open the window, and we'd climb in. And if you're lucky enough to get a seat, you know, it was all right. But if you weren't, of course, you were caught standing and sent out.
Well, you had to sit on a lap, yes.
That's right. It was very fun. But you didn't, in fact, go into the cinema as a job for quite a while, did you? You were.
No, I was a fairly late entrant to the cinema, really. I was a journalist long before I went to the cinema.
And
yes.
what kind of writing did you do as a journalist?
Well, I was on a paper called Answers for a long time, and it was a very interesting job, that, because they had a character called Mr. Answers who had to go and find out what it was like to do this, what it was like to ride on the speedway. Only time I've ever ridden a motorbike in my life was against the world champion on the speedway. I had to even ask him how to ride it. I had to go as one of Carnera's sparring partners, and he didn't understand my very bad Italian and knocked me out. I've been knocked out by a heavyweight champion of the world. I bet nobody here can equal that.
I hope you were insured at the time for that sort of work.
I wasn't. If I was, somebody else got the money.
Well, in what sort of way did you then get into screenwriting?
Well, it was a bit of luck again. I mean, so much in life is luck, isn't it? I was about to take a job as assistant editor of a weekly paper, of Everybody's. Remember Everybody's Weekly?
Yes, I do.
And I'd been off the job as assistant editor, and I was on my way to the office, and I ran into the publicity man of Ealing Studios, and he said, oh, they'd just been showing a press show of a new film. He said, come and have a drink with the boys. And I went in, and they said, they were rather criticising the script, and they said, well, where can we find a writer? And I said, well, I'm a writer. And they said, well, how many films have you written? And I said, none, But my friend Danny very sweetly said, but he's lived lots of films. So this was repeated to Sir Michael Balkan, and he said, well, give him a trial. So I went to Ealing for 3 months, and I stayed there for 16 years.
It was at Ealing that you did a lot of your very famous films, wasn't it? Hue and Cry and
Yes,
A Lavender Hill Mob. And, well, in fact, we're going to have another look at A Lavender Hill Mob bit of the film again. And this is, in fact, where Alec Guinness is being seduced into becoming a criminal by Stanley Holloway.
If anyone did rob our van, well, it's virtually impossible to dispose of stolen bullion in this country at any rate.
Yes. Oh, yes, I imagine so.
But of course, if it could be smuggled aboard,
What a hope.
well, I wouldn't say it's out of the question. Saying one had the means of melting the stuff down.
In the kitchen stove. What a job.
No, of course not. It would mean taking on a partner.
Ah, risky. Bringing other people in.
That would be essential in any case. No one person could rob our van unaided.
You mean he'd need accomplices?
Precisely. A gang.
A gang? Not so easy to come by.
Oh, I don't know. With gold selling on the continental black market at 2.5 times its standard price, I mean, quite a few people would be willing to chance an arm for $500,000.
Yes. But how would you get your gold across to the continent?
Well, supposing one had the right sort of partner, in the form of, shall we say, Eiffel Tower paperweights.
By Jove, Holland, it's a good job we're both honest men.
It is indeed, Pendlebury.
The interesting thing about that particular scene was that it had to be rewritten 11 times before we got it right. And usually when you get a scene that has to be written and rewritten, it's best to scrap it all together because it never comes right. But I think that did come off the 11th time.
It's a very good part, I must say. It all comes back to me, all those comedies, when I look at them. Apart from your devotion to the cinema, I mean, do you think that you brought to screenwriting your own life, or is it an imaginative thing that you did in your screenwriting?
Well, I like to think I've got sufficient imagination, but thinking back on it, you know, over and over again, it was always based on something which had happened to me. I mean, that scene we saw early on in the Lavender Hill Mob was an example. I couldn't think of how to end that script, the Lavender Hill Mob, and I suddenly thought back to the time during the war. I was a war reserve policeman, and one night I was in the communications room, and we had a message that a stolen car. And it was our own superintendent's car, which gave me greatly at the time. And I suddenly thought back to this and thought, well, supposing we used that, I always wanted to use that in a film one day, and supposing they pinched the car, and that gave us the climax. So I do depend rather a lot on experiences. It's probably why I've tried to give myself so many experiences is because I lack sufficient imagination otherwise.
Well, I don't know. I think it's a good idea to use your experiences in this sort of way. The thing that I really don't know about is, in fact, a screenplay. So if I can be very basic about the next few questions. One is, do you write it in dialogue?
Oh, yes, yes. There are several stages. The first one, you write a treatment, which is just writing the action as it takes place without any dialogue. If that is approved, the next stage is to have a dialogue treatment, yes, because your characters can't really come to life until you get them talking.
No, but you see, do you then write a little biography at the start
yes.
to tell the people what the people
each
are?
character, yes. You will have probably a quarter of a page about each character, saying things about him that will never be seen on the screen at all. But so that the director knows what sort of a man he is, and to help with the casting.
And then when you've got your character in your mind, and in the script, do you actually put things like he grimaces horribly, or do you,
well, you have the brackets, you know, for over and over again, the mood, certainly, yes, to give the... You don't do any camera movements. I leave that to the director completely. Only you'll see books on how to write films, and you'll all see about camera tracks in and so on, but the screenwriter always ignores that because the director will always ignore it. So that's that technical side you leave out, but the actual mood of the characters, yes, you do indicate. Yes.
Because I think it was Bernard Shaw I was taught at school, was one of the playwrights that made absolute use of stage instructions to tell the producer
Well,
what
I
he
think
wanted
that
the
was,
actor.
Yes, and that's what we do. He was a very good mentor for that, because we all follow that, yes.
But then, did you also have in your own mind perhaps the idea of who, as an actor, would play the chap you were putting into the script?
One tried not to, you know. It was much easier to write a script and see your character, and then later on say, well, what actor would fit this character?
Yes.
I found it much easier always to create a character that way, but the trouble was anybody who looked over your shoulder halfway through the writing said, well, that's a jolly good part for so-and-so. And after that, you couldn't forget him. And you always saw him in your mind, but I prefer not to.
And then when you finished your script and you handed it over to the director, were you able to nurse it through the next stages, or did you just hand it over and that's it?
Not really, no, because you were usually on another job by that time. You see, for the time you finished the script and all the preparations had been made for shooting the film, probably by the time they went on the floor, 3 months had passed, and the writer was on another job altogether. But the great thing at Ealing was that we were always in the same firm. We were always together, so you could be called back off something else to go back if they were in trouble and say, can you rewrite this scene? But apart from Ealing, where everybody worked in a team, it's rather difficult, because if they want to rewrite on something, the original writer may be, you know, away in Yugoslavia or Italy or America or anywhere, and they can't get hold of him, so somebody else does the patchwork job. I
wonder when you see the film in its finished form, what your feelings are. You know, do you feel it hurt that they've altered it, or?
You always imagine that what you were writing, at least in my case, I always imagined what I was writing was the most wonderful script of the most wonderful film that had ever been made, you see. And naturally, no film could ever live up to that. So that you always had a sense of disappointment. But the only exception was the Lavender Hill Mob, which, when I saw it on the screen, I thought, well, this was much better than what I'd imagined. That was the one exception.
Well, we're going to have a look at another film of yours, though, which I personally was never disappointed in. You must remember it, The Passport to Pimlico.
Oh, that also stood up very well to my imagination.
With Margaret Rutherford as a professor, wasn't it?
Yes,
It's a marvellous thing. That needs explanation, I think.
Well, that scene was shot very soon after the Berlin airlift. You see, in the plot of Passport to Pimlico, we found that a section of London, Pimlico, was suddenly found to be, and had been for the last 500 years, foreign territory. And so that all the rationing which we still had after the war didn't apply there anymore. And the British government tried to pressure the local inhabitants, and in the end they tried to starve them out, but the great British public wouldn't stand for this. And so they had parcels for Pimlico, bundles for Burgundy, and they were all thrown in, and it was followed the Berlin airlift, so it really was a parody on the Berlin airlift. And the highest part of the Pimlico airlift was when a pig was dropped by a parachute, as we've just seen. And that always got an enormous laugh in the cinemas. But it would have got a far bigger laugh if the audience could have seen what happened when the scene was shot, because the poor pig was very nervous and he had an accident all over the director.
Why do you think there was that sudden burst of Ealing comedies? And it has never been replaced, has it, unfortunately?
I don't think really it has, no. I think one of the main reasons was that there's never since been the sort of setup we had at Ealing, where we had a team of people who were there, whether they were working or whether they weren't. They were always being given great encouragement by Sir Michael Balkan to make anything which struck them as having possibilities, particularly if it was an original written for the screen. Nearly every other producer has to buy a book or he has to buy a play which has already proved itself first. But Sir Michael Balcon, who was very daring for a producer, you could give him half a page of ideas, and he would say, "I think there's a film here. We'll follow this up." And we'd instead of other people sort of being jealous or anything like that about one's work, you would appeal to them and say, "Look, we're in a bit of stuck here. Can you come in and help us? We're not giving you any credit or any extra money for doing it, but we'd be very obliged." And then you would do the same thing for them. And nobody was ever under this pressure thinking, what am I going to do once this film is over? We were all there on permanent employment as a team. We weren't highly paid, and but I think in a way we were happier than the highly paid people who were out of a job when one particular film was over.
Do you have a feeling then that it's usually not so good to derive a film from a book that's written for another purpose?
Not necessarily. I think some books are naturals for a film, or some plays are naturals and others are not. And if they sell enormously as a book, if they're not a natural for the film, they will fail as a film. But there are certain ones that, you know, written as a book, well, the author might have written them as a film in the first place, and they will succeed.
Tiny gawk question, because I'm always film struck. Did you go to Hollywood? And if you did you ever meet a really big film star?
Oh, I went to Hollywood, yes, indeed. I went many times. I think I went 8 times, I think, to Hollywood. And the only time I ever saw any film stars, apart from working in the studios, was almost my first day there, and I kept running into them. I thought, this is wonderful, I'm seeing film stars all the time. I saw the first day I saw Gary Cooper was going into the bank at the same time as me, held the door open for me. I met Marlon Brando and Elizabeth Taylor. I had coffee with her that night. I thought, this is a terrific life, and I never saw another one outside the studio. Except that the second day, I was coming down from in the elevator at my hotel, and as I stepped out of the elevator, a most beautiful blonde was approaching. And so I actually held the door for her to go in the elevator, and suddenly the receptionist put her head out, the real old battle axe receptionist, and said, "Just a minute, young lady, where are you off to?" And she said, "Oh, I have an appointment." And so she said, "Well, come back here and I will call up." "What name is it?" She said, "Marilyn Monroe." So she said, "Well, just wait here." So I had my key. I'd forgotten to give my key. So I said, Marilyn Monroe looked into my eyes and gave me a beautiful wink.
Oh, how lovely.
That was a beautiful introduction to Hollywood.
What do you now find satisfying in your retirement, most of all? Anything new that you've discovered about life?
Yes, gardening. I've just suddenly discovered gardening. It's rather like writing for films, because you've got a seed and it may come up and it may not.
Have you got a lovely garden?
I've got quite a nice garden, yes, and I've got a tame blackbird that follows me around, and he seems to enjoy it, and so I do.
And is there anything that you've never wanted from life?
I've never wanted power. No, if ever I've had power in a very small way, even employing a secretary, I've been embarrassed. I don't want power anyway, no.
Except you had power in a sense over making us all laugh.
Well, I like that sort of power, yes. But
for which, in fact, we're very truly grateful. And you're now at the minute doing one other thing, aren't you? You're writing a book?
Oh, I always write. I have to write, you know, and I'm just finishing another novel, yes.
And I'm afraid our time is up, and I want to thank you very, very much indeed. I've loved having you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.